Happy Wednesday and welcome to another episode of Rally for the Republic. I'm your host, Bryan Rudnick. Today, we're continuing to interview people I've known most of my career who are making a difference and doing their part to help save our republic. Most importantly, I'm focused on guests who can educate the listeners of Rally for the Republic and hopefully inspire you to keep up the fight. Today's guest is someone I've had the pleasure of knowing for, I believe, 2 decades or so, or pretty close to that. And we've worked together in a whole lot of roles that he's held and that I've held. And he served on the staff of many nonprofit organizations, has deep grassroots experience, something a lot of people lack these days in politics. He's worked for state legislators, state parties, lots of political campaigns. And from what I can see on his resume, at least 2 presidential campaigns. I remember at least one of them when we worked together a lot on. And his most important job is being the father to 4 girls. He's also a husband. So today we're hosting Brett Farley to discuss his work as the executive director for the Catholic Conference of Oklahoma. I'm going to need to take a quick break, and then you're going to hear how Brett Farley is doing things that not only impact the state of Oklahoma, but they could be impacting your state too.
This is a battle cry for the American way of life and a relentless pursuit of truth and justice. It comes from a voice with unmatched experience and unyielding resolve. Join us as we dissect current events and tip the scales in your favor. This is Rally for the Republic with your host, Bryan Rudnick.
Welcome back to Rally for the Republic. Today's guest is Brett Farley, Executive Director for the Catholic Conference of Oklahoma. Brett, I thank you for taking the time to join us at Rally for the Republic.
It's always a pleasure.
Before we get into your day job, let's discuss your thoughts as a father, because I just got through reading some media reports that the left thinks we conservatives are mean. How dare we oppose their trans agenda? How dare we oppose their use of pronouns? You're a girl dad, I'm a girl dad. What are your thoughts on that? Because apparently you and I are mean and misguided.
Yeah, we're mean and misguided that we want our children to have the best life that they possibly can. Yeah, so as a father of 4 daughters, obviously I'm appalled at the left's agenda to allow minor children to disfigure their bodies because they feel badly about how kids are treating them at school, because, you know, that never happens. We never experienced that as kids, right?
Yeah.
It's just absurd. The truth is stranger than fiction, and that's certainly true these days in politics, the more we dig into what the left's agenda is.
Have you had any personal experiences your girl's been impacted by this?
Thankfully not. We've homeschooled and private schooled our kids, and we choose those environments very carefully, precisely for these reasons, not only because we want to educate them in our faith, but also because we know what agenda the public schools largely are throwing at our kids to warp their minds, and we're not having any of it.
So let's talk about your day job. You're the executive director of the Oklahoma Catholic Conference. I suspect there may be a handful of listeners who don't know what the Catholic Conference does. Would you please enlighten them?
Yeah, there probably are more than a handful. So the Catholic Church uses words from their millennia-old definitions. So conference is not an event. It's an organization, the act of conferring. So the bishops confer on things related to politics and civics and so forth, and that is the Catholic Conference of Oklahoma. My job, the shorthand essentially, is to be the lobbyist for the bishops in Oklahoma, of which there are 2. And so that consists mainly during the legislative session in Oklahoma, essentially sleeping at the Capitol and spending a lot of time with legislators on advocacy work for bills that we care about, advancing principles that the church cares about, and also in many cases, trying to stop legislation that we're concerned about. So that eats up February to May every year, and then in the interim, it's like a baseball season. And we go into the off season, and we train and prepare and come back again the following year.
What kind of legislation do you focus on?
Well, largely the things that you would expect: pro-life legislation, pro-family, pro-religious liberty, school choice, some criminal justice reform efforts, things like that. Those are really the top priorities, but we get into a lot of things. The challenge is that the church cares about everything. And so trying to decide which priorities are the most important priorities is the biggest challenge, because we have something to say about everything, ultimately, when you get down to the moral level of every debate.
So the left thinks that because you represent a religious organization, you should have no place in government. What are you doing lobbying? How do you justify it?
That's right. The founders never intended for any religious influence in politics at all. Yeah, I think our republic wouldn't be what it is right now. What it has been. It wouldn't. We wouldn't enjoy the freedoms that we have without the influence of religion. And the founders were very clear on that.
In fact, the listeners can't see what I can see, which is you have the great picture of George Washington praying at Valley Forge right behind you.
That's exactly right, and that is just a subtle reminder that at the end of the day, everything we do is grounded in prayer and acknowledgement that there is a God and we are not him.
So before you joined the Catholic Conference, would you please give the listeners a little bit of information about your professional background, what you were doing that led you here?
Yeah, leading up to lobbying, I hadn't done anything of the sort. I'd done everything else in politics but lobbying, and I was actually campaign consulting and fundraising and you name it. I've done everything, and was actually trying to get out of politics when this opportunity came. It may be a surprise to listeners, but politics sometimes can get a little dirty, and I had enough of it and was trying to get out. God would not let me out. He kept opening doors that it was obvious I needed to walk through. And then this opportunity came along and fell in my lap. And it was clear that he wanted me to do something actually meaningful in politics where I could really, really dig my faith into it. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 7 years.
And since you've been there, the Oklahoma Catholic Conference has taken off like a missile and it's been very busy. And now you're making you're getting all sorts of media attention. So let's dive into that.
Let's see.
So tell the Rally for the Republic listeners, what's the big news going on for Oklahoma Catholic Conference? What are you guys doing to stir up trouble?
Well, we're always stirring up trouble. There's always something fun to work on. The big news lately, which actually began back in the fall of 2022, is our effort to establish the nation's first religious charter school. And as of a couple of weeks ago, looks like, well, we're still waiting to see, but it looks like the U.S. Supreme Court may end up taking the case that has bubbled up from that effort. What made you all decide there was a need for a religious charter school? Great question. So for those following the school choice movement nationally, we've had a trio of pretty big decisions come out of the Supreme Court in the last few years, the last of which was the Carson decision that essentially said, if the states have no obligation to publicly fund religious schools, but if they create a program that's publicly available, the public funding available to private entities, they can't tell religious schools they're not allowed to participate. That is, by definition, a violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution. So the Supreme Court has said that 3 different times in the last 6 years. So when that last case was percolating, and we were contemplating what we thought was going to be the decision, which ultimately was, we began asking ourselves internally, okay, well, if that means that states must extend that opportunity to religious schools in the context of private funding for those schools, does that also include charter schools? And as we continue to explore that, our conclusion was, at least in Oklahoma, because there are 45 states that have charter programs, at least in Oklahoma's program, the answer must be yes, according to Supreme Court precedent. So we began working with our state's attorney general and
just to remind the listeners, you're talking about U.S. Supreme Court.
U.S. Supreme Court, correct. So we continue to dig into that possibility, and the motivating sentiment behind that is, this is true in a lot of states. You have rural areas that just they're underserved for quality education. There are public schools everywhere, but oftentimes that doesn't mean anything. You have kids certainly don't have access to religious education, but even quality public education. They don't have access to college prep courses. There are rural areas in Oklahoma where high school kids don't have access to higher sciences and calculus and things like that to prepare them for engineering and STEM related education in college. So that's a problem. But then you also have a lot of kids that have learning disabilities. They might have dyslexia or autism or things that are unconventional modes of learning, and they don't have access to alternative ways of gaining knowledge. And so the idea is, well, let's work with the state. Let's partner with the state and extend a virtual charter school so that we can very efficiently deliver quality education in the mode that kids actually need it. and they can actually learn. It's a novel concept. We want to give education to kids so they can learn. And so we have some expertise that we developed and certainly really kind of honed during the pandemic as we were pulling kids out of school briefly and bringing them online. We learned a lot of things. And so we thought, gosh, these tools and techniques we can deliver across the state virtually in partnership with the state of Oklahoma if they're willing to help us fund this. So that was the idea behind it. And we thought, oh, well, let's pursue this. This is an opportunity we really can't ignore. So we asked permission from the state attorney general. He studied it, rendered an opinion at the end of 2022 that said, yes, per these U.S. Supreme Court decisions, the state's prohibition on funding sectarian schools, which is also known as the Blaine Amendment, which many states have, is unconstitutional. And the Catholic Church should be able to pursue this opportunity. So we did. We filed an application with the state virtual charter board. Long story short, after much debate, they approved it.
Now, was all that application process, just to back up a little bit.
Yeah.
You guys had this great idea to help children. Children needed it. Parents recognized there was a need, I assume. And you and the Catholic Church, and I'm sure there was donors and supporters and various key players in the state who saw this as a great idea, all got together. I'm sure you had to pay lawyers to help with this.
Yep.
And so plans were put in motion. Money is spent. How long does the process take to make that application?
Nearly a year and 300 pages of application. So this is not an easy lift. Creating a school is very difficult, and that's with we've got two superintendents in the state of Oklahoma with decades of experience in education and special education, and yet it took that much time and that much effort and 300 pages of application and study to demonstrate to the state of Oklahoma, this is what we want to do, and we're confident we can do it in accord with our standards and with the standards that the state already has in place for charter schools. Okay. We think we can do it well.
And at what point in the process did you hit roadblocks?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. At the end of 2022, then Attorney General John O'Connor had already lost his Republican primary to the current Attorney General Gentner Drummond. So he knew he was not coming back into office, but he still released that opinion because it was the right thing to do. The page flips into 2023. The new Attorney General takes office. In internal conversations with them, they were backing our effort. And then for some reason, out of the blue, they changed their tune and decided that they were going to oppose this whole effort and yanked the previous Attorney General's opinion in favor of our charter.
So and that set off a new Attorney General.
Correct.
And he also was a Republican?
We use that term lightly.
He's registered
Republican. He was elected as a Republican. Yes.
Yeah, we often talk about those people who happen to be registered Republican on this show.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mistakes do happen even within our own party. So
that's right. Yeah, we have to police our own, and we did not on this occasion. So he's in office and decides that he's going to oppose the effort, and that really kicked off a firestorm. Nonetheless, the virtual charter board pressed forward with their plan to meet and to debate the application. They ultimately debated and voted in favor of approving our charter, in spite of the Attorney General, the new Attorney General's advice to the contrary. And so by a one vote margin, they approved our charter. And the Attorney General threatened him and said, look, if you move forward with this and actually grant them this school a contract, I will sue you in the state court. They moved forward and granted us the charter contract, and he held good on his promise to sue both the school and the charter board itself. So the state of Oklahoma is suing itself via the Attorney General in the state Supreme Court. So that bubbled up.
So you and I know we've been in this game a long time. We both got the gray hairs to prove it.
Right.
Nothing like this happens in politics without somebody being motivated by an agenda.
That's exactly right. 100%.
So have you been able to figure out why a Republican Attorney General would oppose something like this?
Well, I can only speculate because he's smart enough not to tell me what his agenda is. But again,
can he even look you in the eyes?
He looked me in the eye and on a number of occasions and just sort of joked about how we're at odds on this thing, but not on others. But wouldn't come to brass tacks and tell me, this is what's going on, because of course he wouldn't. And I should create some context here for what's really going on. He's running for governor in 2026.
I was about to ask.
That's the real motivator.
Yeah. So is there a donor backing him wanting that?
That's my speculation. Again, because we had internal conversations with his team prior to his changing the tune, wherein it was clear that they were going to back our effort. And then again, he switched his tune. My speculation is that there are special interests behind him that are opposed to our charter school that said, look, if you want our support in 26, you're going to kill this thing. And that's what's going down. Now, I can't prove that, but that's just my speculation.
I'm sure the teachers unions and people like that have nothing to do with this.
Right. They have no dog in this fight at all.
So he sues them. Where does that leave? Yep. Where does that leave your school? The school is called St.
So it's called St. Isidore St. Isidore Virtual Charter School. And so he sued both us and the charter board in the state Supreme Court. And so that percolated and finally was heard. They actually entertained oral argument, which is not normal for Oklahoma courts, but it was such a big case. So our attorneys from Deckert, which is a renowned firm in D.C., their folks have clerked with a lot of our conservative justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. And then ADF is representing the charter board. And so they came in both together and argued on our behalf. So that's
Alliance Defending Freedom you're talking about.
Correct. They did a great job. Now, here's what's interesting about the Oklahoma court. Anybody who follows politics even just a little bit knows that Oklahoma is one of the most red states in the country. And yet our state Supreme Court is among the most liberal courts in the country. And I can get into the weeds on why that is, but most of them were appointed by Democrats eons ago through an arcane system of selection that we have. It's not a federal system. And so the majority of our court are liberal. And so, of course, they hate religious institutions participating in politics. They hate pro-life politics. They hate religious liberty. They hate school choice, all the stuff. So we kind of knew where that we were reading the tea leaves. We knew that it didn't really matter how good of an argument we made in that case. They were most likely going to side against us. And so in the lead up to that, we already had plans to prepare for a request for cert in the U.S. Supreme Court, assuming that we were going to lose, which we did. 7-1. One of our members recused because he's very involved in the church. And so fast forward to now, we have filed with the U.S. Supreme Court for cert, and we're waiting to hear from them on whether they'll take the case.
What were some of the arguments being made at the Oklahoma State Supreme Court about why you can't do this?
Well, great question. The Attorney General's argument essentially is that for the state to fund a religious charter school is essentially to establish religion, which is not a very smart argument at all. As our friends at Notre Dame say, it's a shag carpet sort of argument, a shag carpet theory of establishment that's long been debunked by current and I think smarter legal theory. And it really flies in the face of smart jurisprudence and interpretation of the First Amendment, what the founders actually intended by the First Amendment. As we know, that First Amendment language refers to Congress making laws that establish religions. And partnering with religious entities.
Details don't matter so much to the left. You know that.
No, not at all. Not at all. Facts don't matter at all. But we know our republic has a long and storied history of partnership between state and federal governments and religious entities to promote the common good. That's deeply ingrained in our republic. So to suggest that somehow it's unconstitutional suddenly is absurd at least, but it's also contradictory with current Oklahoma policy because the same year that he filed the suit, we passed a very broad sweeping, I would say the most sweeping in the country, tax credit for private schools, including religious schools, in which the state is paying these religious schools money for their tuition. If that's under that rubric, if that's not establishment of religion, I don't know what is. And yet he's perfectly okay with that and has said so publicly. So on the one hand, a school that might receive even as much as 90% of its funding directly from state dollars is constitutional, but a charter school that's receiving 100% of its money from state dollars is not. I'm not sure how you parse that, but that's the argument he's making to the court. And of course, they're going to accept it again because they opposed the idea in the first place.
You are listening to Rally for the Republic with your host, Bryan Rudnick.
So when I was reading some of the briefs filed by your side, I noticed you all had, and I may not do this justice, so please correct my statements after.
Sure.
That, children in America obviously are guaranteed an education. They're guaranteed a good quality education is our hope. They can go to obviously a private school in many states. I don't know if you have that in Oklahoma. It sounds like you do, like we have here in Florida. You can take a voucher and go to a private school. The private school can be religiously affiliated.
Correct.
And you all made, I guess, an argument in one of your briefs that private citizens, including the parents of the school, can determine a curriculum without government interference.
Correct.
And that's what you're, I guess, working on here with the school that might be bothering some people. Could you elaborate a bit on that position that you all took?
Well, again, it's the idea that the Supreme Court expounded on in all three of those decisions that if a state creates a program of public benefit that is intended for private schools, then religious entities have to be able to have access to participate in that. And that means that they retain their rights to determine their curriculum, to allow whomever they want to attend that school, and retain their religious identity, even though they're taking state dollars.
Now, do the children attending the school have to still meet state standards? Or can
in the charter environment, they do. Yeah, and there's some pretty basic standards. So, these are standards that we outperform anyway. So that's not a difficult lift. Our standards in Catholic schools are much higher already. What we're proposing to do actually is to create even higher standards, especially when we're talking about different modes of learning, disabilities, and so forth. Those are standards that are really kind of cutting edge that we're proposing to do in the context of the school. And so we're doing the state a great benefit by continuing to push forward on those standards that they really should be taking the lead on anyway.
So now we're 2 weeks away, you said, from finding out. So roughly around the time.
2 weeks since we've formally requested cert. So now when they ultimately give us that decision, who knows? The Supreme Court kind of runs on its own schedule, but we could know before the end of the year whether they're going to agree to take the case, and then ultimately when oral arguments are scheduled, that could be next summer.
Right, and so we're talking about the Establishment Clause as the centerpiece of your argument.
Correct.
Are there any justices on the U.S. Supreme Court that you think are just itching to do a case on this?
Well, I think certainly
without giving away any of your legal strategy.
Yeah, our legal strategy is pretty clear. We're going to remind the court what they've already said. So it's pretty simple. Thomas has got a long history on this issue. Of course, Barrett, given her legal authority and experience at Notre Dame and so forth on these issues, is going to be key.
And we don't think the left is going to conjure up some reason then that she has to recuse herself.
Oh, I'm sure they will, because they never miss an opportunity to propose that idea, because justices shouldn't have any personal opinions of their own.
They're going to do that, but there's no reason. Come meet other judges and tell me they don't have personal opinions.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we're not seeing that in the Trump cases at all.
Yeah. What should people of faith understand about what it's like to operate inside government, whether it's federal or state government, especially you're working in state government? What should they know? What should they be prepared to find out so that they're not surprised if they want to have a voice in a public forum?
Well, particularly when it comes to partnering with state and federal governments, just understand there are always strings attached and there's always a cost. So we have to be wary of the things that we take advantage of in partnerships in certain programs that I guess as the Bible says, you have to weigh the cost. Is the juice worth the squeeze, as they say? That was something that we had to weigh really heavily in this effort to determine, is there a risk to our ability to continue exercising our religious faith in the context of this charter school? Our answer was that the risk was worth it. The benefit is worth it. But, I've got friends in even Texas who I wouldn't recommend should go down this path because the strings that are tied to their programs and their statutes for charter schools would be too onerous. And so those are things that we have to always consider anytime we approach government. There are always costs and there are always sometimes unintended consequences that we have to be wary of.
I mean, you and I are, I would imagine in some form, you like me, are involved in get out the vote efforts right now where we're reminding voters to vote their values. And oftentimes we find in the history of this country, a lot of the faith community neglects to vote. They're confused about who to vote for, things like that. So there's always been these special outreach programs. And have you ever been involved in those prior to your current position?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've been involved with voter guide distribution. Back in a previous life, I was interning with the Christian Coalition, so we were heavily involved in doing things like that. And I think it's essential because we have to understand as people of faith that we are the energy and the animus of our republic, and without that element, we're not going to last that long. We're the spirit and I think the moral core of what it means to operate as a free people. It's a right and a responsibility that God's given to us, and that means we have to exercise it.
And apparently Kamala Harris is showing us that she's obviously a person of faith now, because she's hanging out in churches on Sundays these days.
Right. Getting endorsed by Southern Black Baptist pastors.
All right. So, 2 weeks from now, basically, is the election. People of faith need to get out. They need to vote their values. And then I imagine you want them to join you in lobbying at the legislature to push for our values.
100%. It's the age-old adage: if you don't speak, then you don't exist. And people in elected office need to hear people of faith speaking loudly. Otherwise, they will assume that they don't matter, that they don't care.
Is there something you advise people on who are getting involved in the process, especially as they're getting involved in the state legislative cycle? Maybe they've never been exposed to politics, but there's an issue like yours with the school district or the life issue that motivates them finally to get up, get off the couch, and head to the Capitol building. What do you kind of guide them on and advise them on what to expect, and so they're not always disappointed? Because as you and I know, you can't win every battle, no matter even if you have the loudest voice.
Yeah, it's certainly a numbers game. I used the phrase the other day with a state senator. When we put up legislation every year, we take a shotgun approach and we see what's going to stick to the wall, because we know we're going to lose a lot of stuff. But we regularly, any year, we'll have 30% of our bills pass because we're pushing on a lot of stuff, and that's in baseball terms, that's great. That's a great batting average. And so
I would say for anybody who doesn't have a big corporate lobbying background of funds to spread, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, we're happy about it, but that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and that effort is the same for voters. If you want elected officials to care about what you think, then you've got to spend time in their offices and phone calls and emails, and sometimes that's intimidating for voters, but that's what it takes, because again, if they don't hear you, then you don't exist. They have to hear from voters, and they have to hear a lot of numbers. Numbers are motivating. Emails are motivating. I've known members who have decided on how they're going to vote on a piece of legislation by literally counting the emails in their inbox. Okay, this is the way we're going to go because there's one more email in favor of. It's a sad state of affairs, but that's the way it goes. And so our voice is critical. If they don't hear you, then they're going to assume that you don't care. So it takes time and effort to make your voice heard. So
obviously in the last couple of years, most especially, we've heard about parents fighting school boards and problems around the country with DEI and CRT and other woke policies that have gotten parents to wake up and really pay attention to what's happening in schools. Were you seeing the same kinds of things in Oklahoma?
Sadly, again, though we're a deeply red state, we've seen this all over the country, and Oklahoma's not an exception. We had a controversy a few months ago with a principal being hired in an Oklahoma City school district who also happens to be a drag queen, who was caught on camera doing some untoward things with young minor boys. And so, and yet we had to fight to get this guy removed. That's the state of affairs in public schools, no matter where we are in the country, because there is, and has been for decades, a very clear hard left agenda in the public schools to brainwash our kids. And there's, they're not pulling any punches no matter where we are in the country. And I think they recognize we're in a stage now in our country where they have to push as hard as they can on their agenda because they don't have a lot of time left before people kind of wake up and get tired of it. And that's why we're seeing an exodus of folks out of public schools and into private schools. I mean, homeschooling numbers are skyrocketing. Catholic school enrollment is skyrocketing. Private school and school options in general, school choice in general is exploding because parents are fed up. And it's about time.
So I don't know if you've answered this yet or not, but I always like to ask every guest, what do you believe is the biggest threat facing our republic today?
Wow, that is a great question. Boy, there's so many to choose from. I would say it's more a philosophical threat, this idea of relativism that's creeping into our younger generations, that there is no objective truth, because that falsehood really is the seedbed for so many other things, that the woke agenda, the DEI agenda, all these things, those are just, rotten fruit on the tree, that has its core in this idea that there's no truth. If there's no truth, well, then I can determine my own truth for me. And therefore I might have been born a boy, but now I want to be a girl. And all these things, are outcroppings of that idea.
And what can the Rally for the Republic listeners do to help you?
I think we need to teach our kids there is objective truth. And that means things. That means that we have to believe that there is a right and a wrong, and that right and wrong has a source, and that is God. And therefore we must stand for what is right. We must stand for what is true. And that means certain policies are right. Certain policies are therefore wrong. We have to teach our kids. We have to talk to our friends and family and parishioners and so forth, and be bold about what we believe. Because if we don't, again, the left will roll over us like they've tried to do for the last 50 years.
Folks, you've just heard the voice of Brett Farley, who's the executive director of the Oklahoma Catholic Conference, a longtime friend of mine and colleague. I want to let you know, Brett, today's episode has once again been sponsored by another friend of mine, Bob Rubin of the Rubin Wealth Advisors, a guy you would like a great deal because he is a big advocate for raising children properly, and he understands the importance of good education. And Rubin Wealth Advisors is where Bob and his staff bring investors to meet conservative values. They have an expert team that helps you invest and align your money with your values, something I think, Brett, you and a lot of your supporters would appreciate. So if you know anybody who would like to talk to Bob, he can be reached. You can schedule a call with him at rubinwa.com or call 561-288-1111. It's Bob Rubin at Rubin Wealth Advisors, rubinwa.com, to schedule your free portfolio review. I'm Bryan Rudnick, your host here at Rally for the Republic. So make sure you tell Bob Rubin I'm the one who sent you. And also, please remember to share, like, and stay engaged. Make sure lots of great Americans hear what Brett Farley had to say today, because what he's working on will impact every American in every state if we can get the U.S. Supreme Court to rule the right way. Brett's got a big smile on his face. I know he thinks he's going to be successful there. So let's help him out. Make sure to write us feedback at rallyfortherepublic.com. As always, I encourage you to stay in the fight, never give up. Just like Brett, you too need to pick a battle and fight to save our republic. And I thank you, Brett Farley, for being on this episode of Rally for the Republic. It's great to have friends like you who've got the time to spend with me here. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian. It's been great.
And I'm Bryan Rudnick. Again, thank you for listening and have a great day.
Thank you for joining us on Rally for the Republic, where we are fighting for America's future. Visit 1776coalition.com. Rally for the Republic podcast is available on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and download. Join Bryan Rudnick next time as we continue to fight for the American way of life and challenge the hypocrisy. This is Rally for the Republic.